Welcome to BMSC Live and our virtual lab for Ocean Week Canada. My name is Owen. I will be your host today. I've got another team member in the lab here with me who I will introduce you to in a moment. But before we get into that, there's a couple other things I want to just let you know about. So the Bamfield Marine Sciences Center is located on the western side of Vancouver Island, and I can even show you where that is on a map in a second. So we're broadcasting you from within the traditional territory of the Huu-ay-aht First Nations, who have territory along the southern side of Barkley Sound here. The Huu-ay-aht First Nations are one of 15 nations on the western side of Vancouver Island, all within the Nuu-chah-nulth language group, and one of 5 nations on the western side of Vancouver Island here who are signers of the Manulth Treaty Society, so a modern treaty nation. So here in Bamfield, the animals that we're going to show you, where we are broadcasting to you from in the lab, all within Huu-ay-aht territory. Very excited and honored to be broadcasting to you from this territory. The Bamfield Marine Sciences Center is a shared campus of the 5 big universities in Western Canada. So that's University of British Columbia, Simon Fraser University, University of Victoria, University of Calgary, and the University of Alberta. We've been hosting researchers and students here for over 50 years. We actually just celebrated our 50th anniversary last summer. We get a lot of funding for our education programs from NSERC Promo Science, so big thank you to NSERC Promo Science as well. And we like our sessions to be as interactive as possible. So as I said at the beginning, in case there are any new folks, we use the chat function to communicate with you. If you have questions for us, please use the chat function. We don't have the question and answer function enabled. It's just easier for us to keep everything within the chat. And I'll have some questions for you later on as well too. I want to show you just where exactly we are. So I'm going to share my screen and use Google Earth just to show you Huu-ay-aht territory and the Bamfield Marine Sciences Center. All right, so this view should be hopefully a little bit familiar to you. As we zoom in on the western side of North America, you can see the Pacific coast of Canada and the US. Get a little bit closer. We can start seeing places like Vancouver. This over here is Vancouver Island, as many of you are probably aware. If you were coming to the Bamfield Marine Sciences Center, if you're coming from Victoria or Vancouver, you would probably drive up along here or take a ferry across from Vancouver to Nanaimo. And then the most common way to get to Bamfield is to drive from Nanaimo around to Port Alberni. Then there's a logging road that you can take from Port Alberni down to Bamfield, which is down here. So we're right on the edge of Pacific Rim National Park. This big sound here is Barkley Sound. And right down here is the little town of Bamfield. So the Huu-ay-aht First Nations have territory all along this kind of south eastern edge of Barkley Sound. And the little town of Bamfield here is split in half by an inlet. So some of the animals that we're going to show you today, both in their plankton form and as some adults, were collected in the waters just around Bamfield here. And today, I am sitting in this little building right here, the BMSC Whale Lab. So this is the headquarters of our field trip program and our virtual content as well. So that's where we are. And I'm going to switch over. Someone said in the chat, I see my house. I'm going to switch over to another little hand camera here to show you why we call it the Whale Lab. Don't worry, we'll get to plankton in a second, but I just want to show you something that we're really, really lucky to have here at the BMSC. So I'm going to take my little hand camera here. If you've tuned into any of our live sessions in the past, maybe you've seen some of this before. I'm going to make our way over here. The Whale Lab, the headquarters of the field trip program. We're very fortunate to have a bunch of real marine mammal skeletons. And this building was actually built to house the largest skeleton here. Can anyone guess in the chat what species of whale this big one might be? I saw one guess pop up, but then there's another tab open on the phone, so I missed it. Humpback whale. It's not a humpback whale. Good guess. Killer whale. It's not a killer whale, and actually one of the ways you can tell is if we look at its mouth. This whale does not have teeth. So killer whales are toothed whales. They have teeth, big sharp teeth for catching food. This is a baleen whale. So instead of having teeth, it has bristly, almost fibrous material in its mouth that it uses for filter feeding. It's one of our local filter feeding whales. I'll give you a hint. Its name. Oh, Debbie guessed it correct. It is the gray whale. Gray whales are a common filter feeding whale on our coastline here. This was actually a fairly young gray whale. Probably only 4 to 6 months old was the estimate for this whale. So some of the other skeletons we have here, here's a harbor seal. We have lots of harbor seals around Bamfield. This one over here is a river otter, and despite the name, we do get them in the ocean a lot. They do swim around. They like to clamber all over our docks. They like to poop on our ropes just when we need to untie our boats. This one over here, this is a sea otter. So we do have some sea otters around Bamfield, and actually their population is growing around here. So we're super happy to see more and more sea otters in this region. And then at the front here, Pacific white-sided dolphin and a harbor porpoise. So lots of really cool skeletons in the whale lab. I also want to show you our setup today because it's pretty cool. So right over here is my other helper today. This is Kelly. Kelly is one of the other educators in the field trip program and for our virtual content. Kelly's set up here with 2 microscopes that are hooked up to a computer, and we can broadcast the feed of those microscopes over this Zoom session to show you the kinds of things that are in this tiny little dish. And most of them you're not going to be able to see at all until they're under a microscope. So we're really, really excited to show you some cool stuff. I'm going to take us back over here to my setup, and we'll get things started. Darlene, Plankton from SpongeBob, that is correct. We will hopefully be able to show you the plankton from SpongeBob, which is a common marine plankton in our area. So to get more into the topic of today's webinar, we're going to spend some time talking about plankton, what plankton are, what they turn into, because lots of plankton don't stay planktonic for their entire lives. So just to kind of, I want to define some terms very briefly here. Don't worry, I only have like 4 PowerPoint slides that I'm going to show you, and then we're going to look at the real live plankton. But just to define some terms very quickly for you, we're going to head over here. So here we go. The title of our session today, Guess That Larva, the Plankton edition. We're going to look at some really cool marine larvae and try and guess what they turn into in their adult stage. And it is actually, we're right in the middle of Ocean Week Canada at the moment. World Ocean Day is actually tomorrow. So we're getting a little bit of a head start on World Ocean Day by hosting our session today as a part of Ocean Week Canada. So there's lots of other really cool Ocean Week Canada content. Visit their website. They've got all kinds of events, both virtual and in person, that you can attend in your regions. So does anybody know what the word plankton actually means? Let us know in the chat. Got some little video clips here giving you a little sneak preview. What is plankton? What do they do? What do they eat? How do they move? Any guesses? Wanderers. Someone guessed wanderers. Microscopic beings. It's a good guess as well. Most people think of plankton as being wanderers. Debbie says drift. Amy says small. Yeah, so lots of really, really good guesses here. Lots of people think of plankton as being really, really tiny. And in fact, many of them are, but being tiny is not what defines plankton as plankton. The thing that actually defines plankton as a plankton is that they are drifters. So they cannot swim against ocean currents. And it comes from a Greek root. The Greek word is planktos, and it does indeed mean drifter or wanderer. So some of you do have a little bit of a background in plankton here, which is really cool. Good to get us all on the same page here. So a lot of the plankton we're looking at today will be microscopic, but some much larger animals that are also drifters, like jellyfish, are still considered plankton. And some of these animals can swim, but keep in mind the definition that we're looking at here is animals that can't swim against ocean currents, so even like tidal currents. So there are two main kinds of plankton. Got a black bar here. Let me get rid of that. There we go. You should be able to see the whole screen now. Two kinds of plankton. We've got our phytoplankton, which are all microscopic algae. And we've got our zooplankton. So the zooplankton are the animals of the plankton world. One of the easy ways to remember this is that the animals are in the zoo. Zooplankton, animals. Phytoplankton, phyto referring to plants. They're not technically plants, but they do share a really important characteristic with plants, which is being able to photosynthesize. So that's where we're actually we'll come back to it for the last slide a little bit later, but I want to show you first some phytoplankton. So this is where we're going to switch over to Kelly. And Kelly's got a nice view of plankton ready to go for us, of phytoplankton. So there are lots and lots of different kinds of phytoplankton. Some of the ones that we're seeing here are actually big long chains attached together. So all of these phytoplankton are photosynthesizers. They're taking water and carbon dioxide and energy from the sun, and they're turning those three things into glucose or sugar and oxygen. So all these phytoplankton, just like plants, they're producing their own energy. They're producing glucose, which they can break down for energy, and they're producing oxygen. And all of these chains, these kind of what look like blobs attached together, are all chain diatoms. So diatoms are just one group within the phytoplankton. Some of them form big long chains. It helps them float and stay up near the surface. A lot of diatoms also actually have oil droplets in them. So maybe you've heard of omega-3 oils before. Maybe you've heard of omega-3 oils in the grocery store. Omega-3s, a lot of the omega-3s that you get when you eat a nice healthy piece of salmon, those omega-3 oils actually came from the diatoms. So these diatoms produce omega-3 oils because it helps them stay buoyant. They want to stay up near the surface of the ocean, where they have good access to sunlight to photosynthesize. And that oil helps them stay buoyant. And that oil can actually accumulate up through the food chain eventually into the salmon, and then maybe into you when you eat that salmon. I mean, there's one right in the middle there too. Do you see the one that's moving around? The one that's moving around is actually still a phytoplankton. It's a different kind of phytoplankton. It's called a dinoflagellate rather than a diatom. And dinoflagellates are microscopic algae that can actually move. I see that Christy has raised their hand. Christy, if you have a question, you can pop it into the chat and I can answer your questions in there. So the one that's moving around is actually a dinoflagellate. So dinoflagellates are another kind of phytoplankton. Dinoflagellates are really, really cool because there's lots of different kinds, and some of them are responsible for bioluminescence, the light that you can see in the ocean when at nighttime sometimes when you move your hands around. Dinoflagellates are also responsible for red tide. So if you've ever considered harvesting things like mussels or clams to eat, rather than buying them from a store, you have to be really careful that those bivalves, those clams and mussels, aren't full of a toxic dinoflagellate, which causes red tide. And if you eat a mussel or a clam that's full of red tide dinoflagellates, you can actually get paralyzed. So you want to be really, really careful harvesting food from the shoreline. There are government websites that you can check to see if an area has been tested for the presence of red tide. And if it has been and is positive, then you definitely don't want to eat any shellfish from that area. So we've seen two different kinds of phytoplankton, both the diatoms and the dinoflagellates. You see diatoms that form chains. Some of them are more disc-shaped. Some of them have spines on them, but all of them are microscopic algae. One of the really neat things about phytoplankton is that they're responsible for actually more than half of the oxygen that you might be breathing. So up to 60% of the oxygen in our atmosphere can actually come from phytoplankton. Another 10% come from the big algae like the seaweeds, and about 30% come from land plants. But more than half, potentially 60% of the oxygen that you breathe comes from these tiny little microscopic algae. This is a fun kind of spiral shaped one. Some diatoms are really, really beautiful. They come in really neat shapes and configurations, like these chain diatoms. It does look like pasta, Debbie, I agree. Okay, so good view of, oh, there's a really cool one. Okay, do you see the diatom with big long spines on it? So I mentioned how diatoms produce oil to help them stay buoyant, but some diatoms also produce big long spines. Those spines are actually made of silica. So silica is like essentially like glass. Why do you think they have big long spines? What do you think the benefit of these big long spines is? It does look a bit like a sea urchin. Do they have chloroplasts? Yes, I believe all the algae also use chloroplasts, the same structures as plants for photosynthesis. And the guess is to catch food. Any other guesses? Why might this diatom have these big long spines? I've given you some hints earlier in the session already. I don't see any other guesses coming in. So it actually helps with buoyancy. It does protect them a little bit. Oh, some other good guesses coming in there. Getting stuck, settling down, catching on plants. Really, the long spines help with buoyancy. So it helps them stay near the surface. They catch upwelling currents. It increases their surface area. So increasing their surface area helps them float up near the surface. Okay, I think we've had a good look at phytoplankton. I'm going to show you one more quick slide, because now that we've looked at the phytoplankton, I want to define a few more quick terms. Once we can see the slide here again. So we've got our phytoplankton, the microscopic algae. Now we're going to look at zooplankton, so the animals of the plankton world. And if we can get to the next slide, here we go, zooplankton. There are two different kinds of zooplankton. So one of the kinds of zooplankton are the holoplankton, and these holoplankton spend their whole lives as plankton. So they are always drifters. They're always drifting around in the ocean currents. The other kind of zooplankton are the meroplankton, and they only spend a portion of their lives as plankton. So I'm going to leave these two definitions up for a few seconds. I want you to think a little bit about how this might affect the lifestyle of these animals. Some of them are drifters for their whole life. They never turn into a different life stage that isn't considered a drifter anymore. And others do actually change partway through their life. So to start thinking about what kinds of other animals you can think of that actually go through different life stages. And we'll come back to the meroplankton in a little bit later. First, I'm going to show you some holoplankton. So these are plankton that are drifters the entire time that they are alive in the ocean. Kelly's just switching over to another microscope here. Darlene asks, how long do they live? It all depends on the plankton. Some of them are very short-lived. Some of them can live for many months or many years even. Because there's so many different kinds of plankton. They all have kind of different life cycles and different stages. Okay, so what we're seeing on our screen here looks to me like a copepod. So those of you that wanted to see the plankton from SpongeBob, here it is. This is our plankton from SpongeBob. Copepods are the most common kind of zooplankton. They're found all over the world. There are thousands of species of copepods. There's over 10,000 different species just of copepods. And just like the plankton in SpongeBob, you can see that it has one eye. That black spot on one end is its eye. And the plankton from SpongeBob also has two antennae. You can't really see them quite as well on this copepod, but it does have two antennae that kind of stick out on either side of where that eye is. And they actually use those antennae not just to sense their environment, but to also swim around. So one of the coolest things about copepods is that they're actually the fastest animal relative to their size on our planet. And it just disappeared. So you can see how quickly it can take off. So this plankton is actually capable of moving at up to 6 kilometers per hour. So it doesn't seem like very fast to you. You could probably run faster than that. But for this tiny little animal to move at 6 kilometers an hour, that's incredible. If you scale that up to a human size, that would be like you swimming through water at over 6,000 kilometers per hour. Isn't that wild? So if this copepod were human-sized, it would be swimming through water at about 6,000 kilometers an hour. So this is the fastest animal relative to its size on our planet. So zooplankton, like this copepod, eat phytoplankton. They eat diatoms, and in fact, they're really, really hungry. They eat thousands of diatoms every single day. They're really, really effective diatom grazers. So they're kind of herbivores. They eat not plants, but they eat microscopic algae. And so I think what we're looking at here is a water flea. So we've left the copepod behind. We're looking at a water flea now. Maybe you've heard of water fleas before. They're actually cultivated by a lot of people as food for fish tanks at home. So maybe you've heard of water fleas, or something called Daphnia is a genus of freshwater water fleas, but we get lots of water fleas in marine plankton as well. You can see the big eye spot there. They have a pretty big eye relative to their body size. They're not related to fleas, but they are kind of in the same phylum of animals. They're arthropods, so they are related to all the insects, but they're technically crustaceans. So this is a tiny little crustacean with a big eye, a little carapace. They do have little swimming arms. I can't really see any at this resolution, but this is a water flea. One of the neat things about water fleas is that the females can actually reproduce asexually. So females can produce their own eggs that don't have to be fertilized by males, and they carry them in a brood pouch until they hatch. And all of the babies that hatch are identical female copies of the mother. Fleas, but that's one of the really neat things about water fleas. They're able to reproduce both asexually and sexually. Oh, the copepod just went cruising by there at top speed. There's another water flea. So both the copepod and the water flea, they have in common the fact that they stay as drifters for their entire life. So even this really powerful swimmer, the copepod, it's capable of swimming at really high speeds, but really, really short distances. The copepod is probably less than 1 millimeter long. Some copepods can get a little bigger, up to 2 millimeters long. But even with that really powerful swimming speed, big ocean currents still pull them around. Wherever the currents want to take them, they have to go. They don't have a choice. So they're still considered plankton. Same with this water flea. So those are good examples of holoplankton. Remember that term, holoplankton? They are planktonic throughout their entire life. Ooh, there's a good water flea. So that might actually be a female with a brood pouch. That big thing on the one side of the water flea there, that might be a brood pouch filled with eggs. And you can actually see its little swimming arms too, twitching around there. Nice, this is a good shot, Kelly. So yeah, just to again reiterate, holoplankton, planktonic their whole lives. Some other examples of holoplankton are jellyfish. So when they're in their jellyfish stage, they're drifters. Even though some jellyfish can swim, they're not capable of swimming against a current. Get lots of other more obscure holoplankton as well. Kelly thinks she's got a jelly to show us. Oh, there it is. Okay, it'll come into a focus in a second. There's a really tiny little juvenile jellyfish. So not a whole lot bigger than that copepod. This jellyfish is probably only 2 or 3 millimeters long. Eventually it'll grow up into a larger jellyfish. It's kind of on its side. So it's kind of like 90 degrees to the left. The colored dots on the right-hand side there are actually kind of around the circumference of the opening at the bottom. So it's trying to swim. It's a little bit stuck in our dish under the microscope. So there's another really good example of a holoplankton. There's one other kind of holoplankton that we saw lots of on Monday. We don't actually have a live example to show you, but I want to tell you about it anyway because I got so excited as I learned more about this holoplankton. It's something called an ostracod. And if you later on after this session, if you Google the term ostracod, I'll put it in the chat here. Look up ostracods once this session is over, just to see what they look like. They almost look like a tiny little microscopic clam, but they're technically a crustacean. Some of the common terms for ostracods are bean clams or seed shrimps. So seed shrimp is a little more accurate, more closely related to crustaceans than they are to clams. And the more I researched ostracods, the more crazy, cool facts I discovered about this group of animals. So I want to share some of these facts with you because I think they're such a neat animal. They might be my new favorite animal, these ostracods. They're also holoplankton, so they stay planktonic their whole life. They're a zooplankton, an animal plankton that is actually able to bioluminesce, so they can produce light through a chemical reaction. And apparently, during the Second World War, the Japanese army would collect in high abundance these ostracods and crush them up and then use powdered ostracod on the battlefield to create light. So they could mix a little bit of water with these crushed up ostracods and it would cause them to still bioluminesce. The chemical reaction to produce bioluminescence would still happen. And they could use these tiny little dishes of ostracod pulp, creating light, to look at maps and read orders and directions without being seen by the enemy. Isn't that wild? So they were kind of making little glow sticks almost out of crushed up ostracods. One of the other really cool things about ostracods is that they can survive being eaten. They can close up their little shell pieces, and they can actually get eaten by fish and close up really tight and pass all the way through the digestive tract of fish. And survive. So really, really cool. My last favorite new fact about ostracods is that they are actually the owners of the oldest known fossil record of a penis. So ostracods, as a crustacean, have penises for reproduction, for sexual reproduction. And there's a fossil record of ostracods from 425 million years ago. 425 million years ago, a fossil of an ostracod which had a penis and currently holds the record for the oldest known fossil penis. So those are the ostracods. Look them up after. Let's move on to some more of the plankton that we actually have examples of. Okay, what we're gonna do now, we're gonna switch over to the meroplankton. So we're gonna be looking at plankton, which only stay as drifters for a portion of their life. And at some point in their life, they eventually turn into something else which isn't a drifter anymore. Can anyone think of an example on land of an animal that does that? An animal that has a larval stage that eventually turns into an adult stage? If you have an example, throw it in the chat for everyone else to see. So what we're looking at here is something called a zoea. So there's 3 zoea on the screen here. And these zoea are larvae of a different marine organism. And if you have any guesses, guess what? What do you think this might be the larval stage of? And I'm seeing some comments in the chat here about caterpillars to butterflies, and that's totally a really good example. That's exactly what I'm thinking of. Caterpillars don't really look like adult butterflies, but they eventually, at some point in their life, they go through a metamorphosis into an adult stage. And lots of marine animals have similar styles of life cycle. So what do you think these zoea eventually metamorphose into? Rachel's guessing shrimp or krill. Debbie is guessing some sort of fish. These are great guesses. Anyone else have any other guesses? Common marine animals that these little zoea might turn into? I can show you an adult version. So I'm going to switch over to my other camera here. These zoea eventually turn into an animal like this. What's this? It's kind of hiding in the corner there. Maybe I can fish it out. A crab, totally. So those zoea, that's the larval stage of crabs. And they don't really look anything like this adult stage. So this is a what's called a foliate kelp crab. They're a really cool species of kelp crab. I'll let it crawl back off there and sink back down into the little tank. Well, maybe I'll flip it over. It landed upside down. There you go, little buddy. So isn't that neat? Let's head back over here. We'll go and look at some more plankton. So there you go. There's a good example of an animal that eventually metamorphoses into a crab. So this zoea is one of the larval stages of crabs. And you can kind of actually see, if you look really closely at the eyes of the zoea, you can see that they are, they kind of look like insect eyes. They have multifaceted compound eyes. And so eventually, yes, this zoea would turn into an adult crab. So shore crabs as well. If you're on the beach on the coast here and you see purple shore crabs, or Dungeness crabs, red rock crabs, those are all kinds of crabs that would have a zoea as a larval stage that eventually metamorphoses into. Okay, let's move on to another one. Let's see what else we have. I like this guessing game. I'm going to see if I can get you to guess what some more of these miroplankton turn into. What do you think this is? This one might be a little bit easier. We're going to see if this one moves. Maybe it'll show us. Debbie guesses clam. Rachel guesses clam or mussel. This one's not currently moving for us. We'll give it a second and we'll see if it moves. But yes, you are correct. This is called a pedivelager. So the term pedivelager refers to this larval stage of the clam. At this point in the clam or the mussel's life cycle, they are looking for a place to live. So if you're a clam, you're looking for nice sandy sediment to dig into. If you're a mussel, you're actually looking for rocky intertidal, which you would then attach to using structures called byssal threads. So not all bivalves live in the same kind of environment. Kelly's going to see if she can find us another. Oh, there it is. That was quick. So this is here we're kind of going back through the life cycle of the clams and the mussels here. The first one we looked at is closer to a juvenile stage. The one we're looking at right now is just a velager. So as a velager, these little tiny microscopic baby clams can actually swim around. The velager has a structure called a velum, and if they stick out their velum, it kind of looks almost like two little butterfly wings covered in little vibrating fibers or cilia, and they can actually use those little cilia to swim around up and down in the water column. And at this point in their life cycle, they would use those cilia to swim kind of up into a current, and that current would carry them along for a little while, and then they would close up the two sides of their clam and sink down to the bottom. Use a little structure called a foot to kind of test the area around them to see if if that area tastes good, and they actually are tasting. They're using their little foot to look for chemical food cues, and if the area that they tastes like the kind of food that they would want to eat as an adult, then they stay there and live there. But if it doesn't taste good, then they close, or then they bring the foot back in and they put their velum back out and they swim back up into the water column. So these ones are being shy. They're unfortunately not going to open up for us and swim around for us. That's okay. I get shy sometimes as well. I'm going to show you an adult bivalve that these might turn into one day in their future. So back over to my other camera here. Let's take a look at, I don't want to give away any of the other animals that we're looking at. So I'm going to move this one out of the way, and then we'll take a look here at a scallop. So scallops are bivalves. Maybe you've eaten scallops in restaurants before. The part of the scallop that you eat is the muscle that they use to help themselves stay closed. So this scallop, I wonder if we can get a little bit of a view from the side. You can actually kind of see that the scallop is open. So the scallop is cycling water through its internal structure. This scallop would also be eating phytoplankton and zooplankton, filter feeding those little microscopic organisms for food. If I give it a little tickle, will it close up? Oh, yeah. Although this one's not too shy. So there we go. There's a good example of a bivalve. We looked at the bivalve larvae. What have you got next for us, Kelly? Ooh, here's a fun one. This is called a nauplius. A nauplius. What do you think this might turn into in its next life stage? Any guesses? It's got almost what look like 6 little arms on either side. Got a black spot right in the center. Some people guess lobster, some people guess urchin. These are good guesses. We actually don't have any lobsters on the west coast here. They are native to the eastern side of North America and the Atlantic Ocean. We get a guess for hermit crab as well. Nobody has actually guessed what this animal eventually turns into yet. Hermit crab and lobster are the right group of animals. It does eventually turn into a crustacean. Can anyone think of any other crustaceans? Somebody guesses shrimp. What's a crustacean that if you go to the beach and you walk around with bare feet on the rocks, you might actually cut your feet on? Oh, there we go. Someone guessed barnacle. This is a baby barnacle. Who would have thought that baby barnacles have a little life stage that moves around like this? So yeah, this is a barnacle nauplius. There are various other crustaceans that also have a life stage that kind of looks like this, but all barnacles have a nauplius life stage. Why do you think as a barnacle, an animal which is attached to a rock, why do you think it's important for it to have a larval stage that can move around through the water column? Why do you think that's important? While you're thinking about that, we're going to switch back to this camera and I'll show you an adult barnacle. Debbie's got the right answer. It is exactly that. So they can populate other areas. So this one's actually kind of shaded. I wonder if I can. This is a giant barnacle. So you can't actually really see down inside there. It's a little too dark. Most barnacles that you see on the beach are a lot smaller than this, but this is a giant barnacle. As you can tell, it's quite large. There's my hand for reference. Most barnacles that you see on the beach are a lot smaller. But yeah, so having a larval stage that can move is really useful for populating other areas. It's also really useful for not competing with your offspring for food. So if all of your babies as a barnacle were right next to you, then you'd be competing with them for food. The barnacles had the great idea of sending their babies as far away from them as possible. So all of their children go as far away from them as they can by having little moving children. And then the parent barnacle doesn't have to share food with its babies. A little bit different from human life cycles. Okay, what are we looking at now? What could this one be? Totally, Debbie's on it straight away. This one's a little more obvious. This is a worm larvae. So lots and lots of segmented worms live in the ocean. Many thousands of species even of segmented worms. So segmented worms that you are familiar with are things like earthworms probably. Maybe if you've been to the ocean before and you go down to the docks, you might see tube worms growing on the underside of docks. And all those tube worms have a larval stage that kind of looks like this. So if you look really closely, you can kind of see the segments just like on an earthworm. These polychaete or segmented worm larvae, some of them are quite good swimmers. You can see this one kind of wriggling around. There's another one kind of at the top of the screen. Kelly, can we go look at that one? So this is another worm larvae. And you can kind of, if you look really closely at this one, you can kind of see little bristles coming off of each side of it near the kind of more bulbous end. So those little bristles are really useful for swimming around. So this little worm here is kind of like earlier on in its life stage. It would add segments down at the narrower end to eventually turn into a longer worm. And I think we've got some bigger worms to show you as well. Here's a much bigger worm. So this came in our plankton sample as well. Here's a worm, a polychaete worm that's much further along in its life cycle. Ooh, kind of gives me the heebie-jeebies to look at. A whole lot more segments. You can actually see mouth parts at the front. Some segmented worms have really powerful jaws. They can actually give you a bit of a pinch if you pick up a bigger marine worm, so watch out. You can see longer bristles along the side. Someone asked if this is a bristle worm. I'm not actually familiar with a species known specifically as a bristle worm, so I'm not really sure. But lots of segmented worms do have a larval stage like this. It does look like an aquatic centipede. However, centipedes are arthropods, so they're more closely related to insects and crabs, whereas this worm is more closely, related to earthworms and stuff like that. But there are some really interesting similarities. How big do they get? Great question. A lot of marine worms are just kind of like this size or maybe a little bit bigger, but there are some really impressive, really large marine segmented worms as well. One of them that you maybe have seen in marine like documentaries before is something called a bobbit worm. If you've ever heard of a bobbit worm, if you haven't, I'm going to put that in the chat as well, and you can look it up. Bobbit worm. Might have two T's at the end of bobbit, I'm not sure, but you should be able to find it. Bobbit worms can actually be like 3 to 4 meters long, and they live their whole life buried in the sediment at the bottom of the ocean. And they're really good ambush predators. So bobbit worms have big jaws on a worm that's like several meters long, and they live in tunnels in the sediment on the ocean floor, and they lie in wait for other animals to get too close, even fish. Bobbit worms are actually capable of grabbing and eating small fish with these really impressive, scary jaws. So yeah, several meters long, some of these marine worms. Marine worms are a really cool group of animals that are only just kind of starting to really get fleshed out in the scientific community. There are lots and lots of new species of worms being discovered all the time, marine worms. Kelly, do we have that flatworm to look at as well? So when most people hear the word worm, they kind of think of earthworms. And that's a segmented worm, and the ones that we just looked at are also segmented worms. But there are a couple of other totally different groups of animals that share the term worm. And we're looking at one here called a flatworm. It's pretty quick. I don't know how long we're going to be able to keep it in the field of view. This is a larval flatworm. I don't have an adult to show you, unfortunately, but it was so cool to find this. They're not as common in the plankton sample, so I was just really excited to find this flatworm. As an adult, they don't look a whole lot different from this. They're just a bit bigger, and they really are just like a flat, round oval. As adults, they often live kind of like in nooks and crannies on rocks, underneath rocks. Sometimes you find flatworms intertidally on the beach. If you flip over rocks, you can find a little flatworm. But in their juvenile planktonic life stage like this, they're pretty quick swimmers. And so flatworms are a totally different phylum of animal, kind of a different branch of the invertebrate tree of life. This one settled down a little bit. Okay, what's next? Oh, I never actually showed some adult worms. I have one really cool adult worm I want to show you. Sorry, got distracted by the flatworms. Okay, we're going to replace the spotlight. Let's go over here and look at some tube worms, some really beautiful tube worms. So that little fluffy thing there is the feeding structure of a tube worm. So some tube worms found on the underside of docks have more flexible tubes. These are actually calcified tube worms. So you can maybe kind of see a little bit lower down there a white tube that this worm is sticking out of. So in their larval stage, they're swimming around in the water, they're drifting around in the currents. When they find an area that they want to attach to, some species of worms actually settle down and live in one spot for the rest of their lives. And these tube worms are really good examples. So if I give it a little gentle poke here, oh, there it goes. So I just spooked that worm back into its home. You can see the little opening there. This species of worm takes calcium carbonate from the water around it and turns it into a calcified tube. And they live in that tube in one spot for their entire lives. So there's some more over there. The things that are sticking out the end are feeding structures that help them filter feed. So another group of animals that filter other plankton out of the water. We'll give this one a little tickle. There it goes. So there's a good example of just one kind of many tube worms. You can't actually see the segmented part of the adult because it's all buried down in that tube, but that calcified tube is a great way to protect yourself from predators. Really good source of protection. All right, what have we got here? What do you think this little plankton turns into? It's kind of stuck up against the side. Someone guesses shrimp. Really good guess. This is a tricky one, and it's actually tricky even for us. When I see this one, I almost always have to look it up just to confirm, because shrimp have a larval stage that looks really, really similar to another kind of crustacean. What's a common intertidal crustacean that you might come across on the beach that we haven't talked about yet? Not the shore crabs, not the shrimps. There's another kind of crustacean, and this kind of crustacean often lives inside the shell of another animal. Inside the shell of another animal. Hermit crab, that is correct. This is the larval stage of a hermit crab. If we were able to get an even closer view at the tail or the telson of this hermit crab, you would be able to see that it's composed of 3 little parts. I don't know if we're going to be able to get that kind of video resolution here broadcasting. If a similar shape of organism that looked like this, but just had one tail part at the very end instead of 3 kind of 3 separate little tail parts, then we would know that it's a shrimp. But with 3 separate little tail parts, we know that this is a hermit crab. So this is the hermit crab larvae. Let's go and look at a real hermit crab, in part because they're my favorite animal. This one, you may have gotten a little sneak peek at this one earlier on in the session. So hermit crabs live inside the shell of another animal, inside of a snail shell. I'm gonna see if I can pick this one up. Maybe we'll get a better view of it. And if we hold real still, maybe it will come out and say hi. Or maybe not. Maybe it's too shy. Oh, I see some movement. So I can at least see some little claws sticking out there, some little legs. Oh, here we go. Oh, maybe I moved too much. Maybe it'll come back out. This is a grainy hand hermit crab. So lots of different species of hermit crab. They all have a larval stage that looks like the one that we just showed you. Got to be real patient with hermit crabs sometimes. Some of them are shy, some of them are brave. Oh, there it goes. It flipped itself over, and let's see if it'll walk off my hand. I love hermit crabs. I think they're super cute. And there it goes, back into the water. So there's our hermit crab. And who knew that the baby of a hermit crab could look kind of like a little shrimp? So I've gone a little bit over time here. One more thing that I wanted to show you. Thanks for sticking around if you're still here. One more thing that I wanted to show you is what the larval stages of different echinoderms, like like starfish and sea cucumbers and urchin look like. So I'm going to do another really quick screen share here to show you a video clip. We couldn't find any echinoderm larvae in the plankton sample, but I have a little video clip here to show you. It's just 6 seconds long. Here's a video clip of some that we have from the past, other past labs. Just want to mute that. Let's play it one more time. So you can see they actually do swim around. You can't really see their swimming structures. They also have little vibrating cilia. At this point in their life, this tiny little, what's called a pluteus larvae of the echinoderms, kind of just looks like a little spaceship. Do you see how the one that's moving kind of has 3 prongs? They kind of float around in the water, and eventually those 3 prongs kind of extend and they can turn into much more kind of elaborate spiny structures. And then eventually this pluteus larvae metamorphoses into some other kind of echinoderm. So the echinoderms are things like sea cucumbers and sea urchins. Let's go take a look at one. So there's a California sea cucumber. This is a really common sea cucumber species in our region. One of the bigger ones too. California sea cucumbers like this, they start their life as a tiny little planktonic stage. Lisa's asking if this will be on our YouTube channel. Yes, we'll post this whole session on our YouTube channel in a few days, so feel free to check it out there. Thanks for asking. Some of the other echinoderms in this tank, we've got a starfish over here, or a sea star. This is a vermilion star. Kelly's gonna pick it up so we can get a nice close look at it. So even though this sea star looks nothing like the sea cucumber over here, their little larvae look pretty much the same. There are some variations for sure when you start looking at them really closely. But yeah, similar larval stages across these different animals. And down in the corner there is a sea urchin, another echinoderm. This one might be stuck. We'll see if Kelly can pry it up. So this spiny little friend here, this is a green sea urchin, another echinoderm. So all 3 of these animals in this tank, the sea cucumber, the starfish, and the sea urchin, all have a pluteus larval stage, like we just showed you that little video clip. Okay, to wrap up our session here, we planned for a 45-minute session and we're closing in on an hour here. So thank you to those of you who are still here. I had a few kind of conclusion points that I wanted to share with you. And kind of I want to zoom out from plankton here to get us thinking about bigger picture things. And one question that I have for you that I'd like to hear any of your opinions on is, how do you think issues like climate change or plastic waste in the ocean might affect these microscopic animals? So you've maybe learned about how those issues like climate change and marine plastic pollution might affect the big animals. But what about these teeny tiny drifters? Debbie's saying maybe it affects how they move around. Rachel says they could get trapped under plastic and not be able to grow. Impacts on what they end up eating. Yeah, these are great guesses. Any other thoughts? They might not be able to make their shells. That's a really good point as well. Yeah, so you're all thinking in the right way. Affecting how they move, definitely in areas with higher plastic concentration, it could affect how they move. They might get trapped under plastic as that plastic builds up in areas. In terms of what they might be eating, I talked a little bit before about how the phytoplankton are taking in carbon dioxide and water and turning it into sugar and oxygen. So they don't really eat stuff. They just kind of like produce their own energy. Some of the zooplankton, like the copepods, eat the phytoplankton. And part of the process here is that these animals are taking carbon out of the atmosphere and either turning it into sugar or eating other animals that have taken that carbon and turned it into sugar. And then they actually store that carbon when they die because they sink down to the ocean floor, and the carbon in their bodies eventually turns into ocean sediments, and then eventually turns into just like, yeah, it gets compressed into rock, and then maybe eventually turns into oil and gas. So all of this carbon, it can actually be really useful as we get into starting to think about climate change and how the carbon is impacting the atmosphere. Having these phytoplankton taking carbon out of the atmosphere is really, really good. Things like plastic pollution and ocean acidification impact how much these microscopic organisms are able to take carbon out of the atmosphere and store it for longer periods of time. So higher plastic pollution, even at a microscopic level, can be eaten by these zooplankton, take up space in their stomachs, prevent them from eating actual carbon organisms like the phytoplankton, and so they end up storing less carbon overall. And changes in ocean acidification, which is when carbon dioxide dissolves in the ocean waters and makes it more acidic, can also impact the ability of phytoplankton to take carbon out of the atmosphere. So these animals can be really useful to us if there's lots of phytoplankton for taking carbon out of the atmosphere and helping with issues like climate change. But as the ocean acidifies and becomes more acidic and there's more carbon dioxide in it, their ability to do that is reduced. So they're getting impacted in those ways too. So that's kind of my final comments. These animals, even at this microscopic level, can be affected by changes in carbon dioxide and ocean plastic pollution. So if you want to be a part of the solution, then I would encourage you to learn more about some of these issues, ways that you can help reduce plastic pollution, either through your own individual choices, through recycling systems, through choosing to use less plastic in your own lives, but also on a larger level, if you can impact, if you can have an effect on carbon in our atmosphere by doing things like participating in ocean health and climate conferences, participating in shoreline cleanups, maybe even writing to the elected representatives in your area to encourage them to make the right decisions in terms of plastic solutions to the plastic pollution problem, and the importance of reducing carbon in our atmosphere. These are all impacts that you could potentially have to help out even these microscopic animals right down at the very bottom of the food web floating around in the ocean. So hopefully we've been able to show you some new plankton that you've never seen before, some new organisms, and hopefully we've opened up your eyes to what some of these animals actually look like and the cool aspects of their life cycle, the way that they turn from their larval stage into their adult stage. Kelly is encouraging me to go back over to the microscope just for a second because she found my new favorite animal, which is an ostracod. So I talked about these little crustaceans earlier. I'm really, really stoked that we managed to find one because we saw lots of them on Monday in a different plankton sample, and I was so surprised that we didn't see quite as many today. But maybe the tide was different, maybe the time of day was different. So it kind of looks a little bit like a clam, but you can see little appendages on one side that it uses to swim around. So these are the seed shrimp or the ostracods I was talking about earlier. They're one of the holoplankton. They stay in a planktonic life stage for their entire life. They never turn into an adult crab or a sea star or something like that. These are the cool little ostracods. I knew very little about these before yesterday, and now they're my new favorite animal. Thank you everybody for tuning in. This session will end up on the BMSC YouTube page once I've edited a little bit and uploaded it to the YouTube page, so you can check it out later if you want to revisit any of these really cool creatures. Thanks for joining us, and make sure that you check out any other Ocean Week content. Check out the Ocean Week Canada website. They have something called a learning hub there with really cool educational resources like toolkits, video collections, and other resources on how to take action to help preserve ocean health, whether that's related to the plastic pollution problem or carbon in our ocean impacting climate change. Lots of really cool resources, lots of other virtual activities to join as well. So be sure to check out the Ocean Week Canada website for all of those other resources. We really appreciate you joining us today, and feel free to continue staying tuned in to our social media for future live free webinars like this. So with that, we'll wave goodbye. Kelly, thank you very much to Kelly as well for managing all the microscopes. Have a great day, everyone. See you later.